We don't want you driving our children anymore. That's what Mrs. Henderson said to my face on a Tuesday morning in October. Just walked right up to my school bus, looked me dead in the eye, and told me I wasn't fit to transport her precious kids. And you know what the worst part was? She wasn't alone. There were 6 other parents standing behind her, nodding along like a damn jury that had already decided I was guilty. My name's Mike Sullivan. I've been driving bus 47 for Jefferson Elementary for about 2 years now. Before that, I spent 15 years in the Army, 3 tours in Afghanistan. But according to Mrs. Henderson and her little committee, none of that mattered. All they saw were the scars on my face and hands, and they decided I was some kind of threat to their children. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice level the way they taught us in the Army, "what exactly is the problem here?" "The problem," she said, her voice getting louder so the other parents could hear, "is that we don't know who you really are. We don't know what happened to your face, and frankly, some of our children are frightened." I felt that familiar knot forming in my stomach, the same one I used to get in Afghanistan when trouble was coming. The scars she was talking about, they tell a story. A story about 23 children and a burning school, and the worst day of my life that was also somehow the best day of my life. But these people didn't want to hear that story. They'd already made up their minds based on what I looked like. "Mr. Sullivan," she says, standing at the bottom of my bus steps, "we need to talk." I turned off the engine and looked down at her. "What's on your mind, ma'am?" "Some of us parents, we're concerned." She glanced back at her little group of friends, like she was drawing strength from them. "About you driving our children." Now, I'd been expecting something like this eventually. You don't look like I do without people having opinions about it. The left side of my face, it's pretty chewed up. Burns will do that to you. My hands, too. They look like somebody took a blowtorch to them. Which, in a way, somebody did. "What kind of concerns?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "In the Army, they teach you de-escalation. Keep calm. Don't give them a reason to escalate." "Well," she started, and I could see her working up her courage. "Some of the children have mentioned that you look scary, and we've done some checking, and we don't really know much about your background. We just want to make sure our kids are safe." Safe. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. These people were worried about their kids being safe with me. Me, who'd spent my whole adult life keeping people safe, who'd gotten these scars keeping kids safe. But they didn't know that. How could they? "Ma'am," I said, "I've passed all the background checks. Commercial driver's license, clean driving record, no criminal history. Everything the school district requires." "That's all well and good," Mrs. Henderson said, "but that doesn't tell us who you really are, where you came from, what happened to your face." The other parents had moved closer now. I could see Mrs. Patterson, Bobby's mom, Mr. Chen, whose daughter Lucy always saved me a drawing she made in art class, Mrs. Williams, who had 3 kids on my route. They were all looking at me like I was some kind of threat. "I'm a veteran," I said simply. "Served my country for 15 years. Got hurt in the line of duty. That's all you need to know." But that wasn't enough for Mrs. Henderson. "What kind of injury? What happened over there? We have a right to know who's responsible for our children's safety." I felt my jaw clench. The thing about civilians is, they think they have a right to your pain. Like, because they pay taxes, they own your story. They want to hear the gory details, but they don't want to understand what it cost you to live through them. I'm not required to discuss my medical history with you, ma'am, I said. Well, maybe you should be, she shot back. Maybe the school board needs to hear about our concerns. That's when I knew this wasn't going to blow over. These folks had made up their minds about me based on how I looked, and nothing I said was going to change that. Not unless I told them everything, and I wasn't ready to do that. Might never be ready. You do what you think you need to do, I said, and started up the bus engine. But right now, I've got kids to pick up. The rest of that route, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. You develop a sixth sense about these things when you've been in combat. Trouble coming, like storm clouds building on the horizon. And I was right. By Thursday, there was a whole damn committee formed. Concerned Parents for School Safety, they called themselves. Mrs. Henderson was the president, naturally. They'd typed up a petition and everything, demanding that the school board review my employment, demanding answers about my fitness to transport their precious children. I found out about it when Principal Martinez, Sarah's mom actually, called me into her office after my morning route. Mike, she said, and I could hear the stress in her voice. We need to talk about this petition. She slid a copy across her desk to me, seeing it there in black and white, with all those signatures. Damn. It hurt more than I expected it to. These people didn't even know me, but they'd decided I was dangerous based on what exactly? Some scars? How many signatures? I asked. 47 so far, she said quietly. Mike, I want you to know, I don't agree with this. You're one of the best drivers we've ever had. Safety record's spotless. The kids love you. But you've got to follow procedure, I finished for her. The school board's going to want to meet with you. Probably next week. They'll ask questions about your background, your military service. If you could provide some documentation, maybe a letter from your commanding officer, or something about your injury. I shook my head. Mrs. Martinez, with respect, I provided everything the district required when I was hired. My DD-214, my medical clearance, background check. I'm not jumping through hoops because some parents don't like how I look, she sighed. I understand, Mike. I really do. But these parents, they're not going to let this go. Mrs. Henderson's already been to the superintendent's office twice this week. That evening, I sat in my little apartment, staring at that petition. 47 signatures. 47 people who thought I was some kind of monster, who looked at my face and saw danger instead of sacrifice. I thought about calling my old squad leader, Sergeant First Class Rodriguez. He'd retired to Phoenix a couple years back. He'd know what to say, how to handle this. But pride's a funny thing. I didn't want to admit that a bunch of suburban parents had gotten under my skin. So instead, I did what I always did when the memories got too heavy. I pulled out my laptop and started writing in the journal my VA counselor had suggested. Writing about Afghanistan, about Kandahar province, about a little school outside Forward Operating Base Chapman, and why I'd never be able to forget it. The thing is, when people look at me now, they see the scars first. They don't see the man who got them. They don't see Staff Sergeant Michael Sullivan, 1st Battalion, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment. They don't see 15 years of service, 3 Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart. They just see damaged goods. But those scars tell a story I'd never told anyone in this little town, a story I wasn't sure I ever wanted to tell. It was March 15th, 2019. I remember the date because it was supposed to be my last patrol before rotating home. 3 days left in my final deployment, and I was feeling good about it. My replacement had already arrived. Good kid named Lieutenant Morrison. Fresh out of West Point, eager to make his mark, reminded me of myself 15 years earlier. We were doing a routine patrol through a village about 10 clicks from the base. Hearts and minds stuff, mostly. Check in with the village elder. Make sure the Taliban hadn't been through threatening people. Maybe hand out some school supplies the church folks back home had sent over. That's when we heard the kids screaming. The school was on fire. Not just on fire. It was being consumed. Black smoke pouring out of every window, flames shooting up through what was left of the roof, and the screaming. Jesus, the screaming. "How many kids in there?" I shouted to the village elder, an old man named Abdullah who spoke pretty good English. 23, he said, tears streaming down his face. 23 children. The teacher, too. The other guys in my squad, they were already setting up a perimeter, calling for medevac, doing everything by the book. But 23 kids were trapped in that building, and the local fire department was 40 minutes away on a good day. I looked at that school. It was a simple concrete building, typical Afghan construction. The fire had started in the back, probably in the kitchen area where they prepared the daily meal. The front entrance was clear, but the smoke was getting thicker by the minute. "Sarge," Morrison called out, "what are your orders?" I handed him my rifle. "Keep the perimeter secure, radio for additional support, and if I don't come back out..." I looked at those burning windows, calculating odds, thinking about my wife back home who was already planning my homecoming party. Tell my Jenny I love her. The first trip in wasn't too bad. The smoke was thick, but I could still see. Found 6 kids huddled in the first classroom. Youngest couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Scooped up 2 of them, told the others to follow me, and led them out. The villagers were cheering, but I wasn't listening. 18 more kids still inside. Second trip, the smoke was worse. Found the teacher, Miss Layla, unconscious in the hallway. She'd been trying to get to the back classrooms. I carried her out, then went back for the kids. I could hear crying somewhere in that smoke. Third trip, that's when things got really bad. The ceiling in the main hallway had started to collapse, burning timber everywhere, and the heat. God, the heat was like nothing I'd ever felt. Found 8 more kids trapped in a classroom where the door had warped shut from the heat. Had to kick it in. And when I did, a wall of superheated air hit me like a freight train. I got those kids out, but I could feel my gear starting to melt. My body armor, my uniform, everything was heating up. The left side of my face felt like someone was holding a blowtorch to it. Fourth trip, I couldn't see anymore. The smoke was too thick, and my eyes were streaming tears. I was navigating by sound, following the crying, the calling for help. Found 3 more kids in what used to be the library. My hands were screaming with pain by then, and I could smell my own skin burning. But I got them out. 2 more trips after that. By the end, I was running on pure adrenaline and stubbornness. My uniform was literally melting to my skin in places. The pain was, well, there aren't words for that kind of pain. But I could still hear kids crying somewhere in that building. The last trip, that's when the ceiling came down on me. I'd found the final 2 children. Twin boys, couldn't have been more than 6. Hiding under a desk in the back classroom. The whole building was about to collapse, and I knew it. But I also knew that if I left without them, they were going to die. I grabbed those boys and started running for the exit. That's when a burning support beam came down right across my back, pinning me to the floor. The pain was indescribable. My body armor had already melted in places, and now I had a burning piece of timber across my spine. Those two little boys, they were looking at me with these huge, terrified eyes. They didn't speak English, but they understood that I was trying to save them. One of them, the braver of the two, he reached out and touched my burned face with his little hand, like he was trying to comfort me. That's when I found the strength to lift that beam. I don't know how. Doctors told me later that I should have been paralyzed. But somehow, I got that burning timber off my back, scooped up those boys, and stumbled toward what I hoped was the exit. I made it about halfway before I collapsed. The smoke inhalation, the burns, the exhaustion. My body just gave out. I remember falling to my knees, still holding those two kids, thinking this was it. This was how Staff Sergeant Mike Sullivan was going to die, in a burning school in Afghanistan, 3 days before he was supposed to go home to his wife. That's when Morrison showed up. Kid disobeyed direct orders and came in after me. Found me passed out on the floor with those two boys still in my arms. He dragged all 3 of us out of there just before the whole building came down. I spent the next 4 months in the burn unit at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. Then another 6 months at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio. 18 surgeries, countless skin grafts, physical therapy that made basic training look like a picnic. But all 23 kids lived, every single one of them. The Army gave me a medal for it. Bronze Star with V device for valor. Made a nice ceremony out of it. Got my picture in the Army Times. But the thing that meant the most to me was a letter I got from Miss Layla, the teacher. She'd recovered from her smoke inhalation and wanted to thank me. She included photos of all the kids, healthy and happy, back in school in a new building that some charity had funded. One of those photos was of the twin boys I'd carried out on that last trip. They were holding a sign written in English. "Thank you, Sergeant Mike." That's the story behind these scars. That's what 47 parents in suburbia thought made me dangerous to their children. The school board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday night. All week, I wrestled with whether to tell them the truth. Part of me wanted to throw that Bronze Star citation on the table and watch their faces change. But another part of me, the bigger part, felt like my service was private. Like I shouldn't have to prove my worth to people who'd already made up their minds. Jenny always said I was too proud for my own good. She was probably right about that. Friday afternoon, I was finishing up my route when little Sarah Martinez came up to the front of the bus. She did this sometimes, waited until all the other kids had gotten off so she could talk to me. "Mr. Mike," she said in that sweet voice of hers, "why do some of the grown-ups not like you? Kids hear everything, you know. They pick up on tension even when adults think they're being subtle." "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" "My mommy got a phone call from Mrs. Henderson. She was saying mean things about you. But I told Mommy that you're the nicest bus driver ever, and you always make sure we're safe. Out of the mouths of babes, right? This 7-year-old could see what those adults couldn't, or wouldn't." "Some people just don't understand things that are different," I told her. "But that's okay. We can't control what other people think about us." "But it's not fair," she said, and I could see she was getting upset. "You're not scary, you're nice, and you have the coolest scars ever." I had to smile at that. Coolest scars ever? Yeah, they make you look like a superhero, Like you fought a dragon or something. If only she knew how close to the truth that was. That weekend, things escalated. Mrs. Henderson had started a Facebook page called Concerned Parents, Jefferson Elementary. She'd posted photos of me taken without my permission, along with speculation about my violent past and demands for transparency about what had happened to my face. The post went viral, not in a good way. People were sharing it, commenting, making assumptions. Someone suggested I was probably a criminal trying to hide my identity. Another person wondered if I had mental health issues that made me dangerous around children. The speculation got wilder and wilder. By Sunday night, that post had been shared over 3,000 times. 3,000 people who didn't know me from Adam, passing judgment based on a few photos and the paranoid theories of a suburban mom with too much time on her hands. That's when Maria Santos saw it. I didn't know Maria personally, but she lived about 50 miles south in Fort Campbell. She was married to First Sergeant Carlos Santos, who'd served with me in Afghanistan. Carlos had been in my platoon during that deployment, had been part of the unit that day at the school. Maria recognized me immediately in those Facebook photos. She also recognized the story that Mrs. Henderson and her concerned parents had never bothered to ask about. Maria shared that post, but with her own commentary. She told the whole story, about the burning school, about the 23 children, about a staff sergeant who'd risked everything to save kids he didn't even know. She posted photos from Carlos's deployment, including ones of me receiving that Bronze Star. Within hours, her post was being shared faster than Mrs. Henderson's original one. Military families started commenting, sharing their own stories about me, about what they remembered from that day. Someone tracked down newspaper articles about the school fire. Another person found the Army Times story about my medal ceremony. By Monday morning, the narrative had completely changed. Instead of concerned parents worried about a dangerous stranger, it was a story about a community that had turned on a genuine hero based on nothing but appearance and prejudice. The principal called me early Monday morning. "Mike," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "I think you need to see what's happening on social media." I didn't use Facebook much, but I logged in and started reading. Comment after comment from people who'd served with me or who'd heard about what happened in Afghanistan. People sharing photos of the kids I'd saved, some of whom were now teenagers. A letter from Miss Layla, the teacher, explaining how I'd saved her life, too. But the comment that got to me the most was from Lieutenant Morrison, except he was Captain Morrison now. He'd written a long post about that day, about watching me go into that burning building over and over again, about carrying me and those twin boys out when I couldn't walk anymore. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan is one of the bravest men I've ever known," he'd written. "Any parent should consider themselves lucky to have their child in his care. I'd trust him with my own kids' lives without hesitation." The school board meeting that Tuesday night was packed. Word had gotten out about the Facebook posts, and it seemed like half the town had shown up. Mrs. Henderson and her committee were there, looking considerably less confident than they had a week earlier. But there were also new faces, veterans from the local VFW post, military families, people who'd read the story online and wanted to show support. I walked in wearing my dress blue uniform for the first time in 3 years, all my ribbons and medals, including that Bronze Star. I figured if these people wanted to know who I really was, I might as well show them. The room went quiet when I walked in. You could have heard a pin drop. Superintendent Williams called the meeting to order and explained the situation. He'd clearly done his homework since the Facebook story broke, because he had copies of my military records, my medal citations, newspaper articles about the school fire. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, "the board has reviewed your employment file and your military service record. We want to publicly apologize for any suggestion that your fitness for this position was in question. Your service to our country and your dedication to the children in this district speak for themselves." That's when Mrs. Henderson stood up. She looked embarrassed, ashamed even. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice shaking a little, "I owe you an apology. We all do. We made assumptions based on ignorance. We didn't know who you really were." "Ma'am," I said, standing up, "you didn't need to know who I was before. My service record doesn't make me any better at driving a bus than I was last week. What matters is that I show up every day, I drive safely, and I care about those kids. That's all that should have ever mattered." The room erupted in applause, but I wasn't finished. "Here's the thing, though," I continued, and the room got quiet again. "I understand why you were concerned. You see these scars, and they tell a story about violence and pain, and things you don't want your children exposed to. And you're right, these scars do tell a story about violence." I could see Mrs. Henderson starting to look uncomfortable again. "But it's not the story you thought. These scars tell the story of what happens when someone chooses to run toward danger instead of away from it. When someone decides that saving lives is worth risking their own. These scars represent 23 children who got to go home to their families that day. 23 kids who are alive today because someone was willing to get burned for them." The applause was longer this time, and I saw more than a few people wiping their eyes. "I don't expect you to thank me for my service," I said. "I didn't do it for thanks. But I do expect you to judge me by my actions, not by my appearance. I expect you to get to know the person before you decide what kind of threat they might be." I sat back down, and the room was silent for a long moment. Then Sarah Martinez's mom, Principal Martinez, stood up. "I'd like to say something," she announced. "My daughter Sarah rides Mr. Sullivan's bus every day. She comes home and tells me stories about how he makes sure every kid gets on and off safely, how he knows all their names, how he asks about their day, how he makes them laugh when they're having a hard morning." She paused, looking directly at Mrs. Henderson. "My 7-year-old daughter sees what we adults somehow missed. She sees kindness. She sees someone who cares about her safety and well-being. Maybe we should try looking through our children's eyes instead of our own prejudices." That's when the floodgates opened. Parent after parent stood up to speak. Bobby Patterson's mom apologized and talked about how I'd stayed late one day when Bobby was sick, making sure he got home safely. Lucy Chen's dad mentioned how I'd helped Lucy with her heavy backpack when she'd sprained her wrist. Even parents who hadn't signed the petition but had harbored private doubts stood up to apologize for their silence. The meeting ended with the school board passing a formal resolution commending my service and my dedication to student safety. They also announced that they were implementing new training for all employees about bias recognition and creating a Heroes in Our Schools program to celebrate the service backgrounds of their staff. But the real vindication came the next morning on my bus route. I climbed into bus 47 that Wednesday morning, not knowing what to expect. Would the kids treat me different now? Would their parents? Would everything go back to normal, or had too much damage been done? I got my answer at the first stop. Instead of just Bobby Patterson getting on the bus, his whole family was waiting. Mom, Dad, and his little sister, who went to the middle school and didn't usually ride my route. "Mr. Sullivan," Mrs. Patterson said, stepping onto the bus. "I wanted to personally apologize to you, and I wanted Bobby to hear me do it." She looked at her son. "Bobby, Mr. Sullivan is a real American hero. He saved children's lives in the war, and now he keeps you safe every day on this bus. I want you to remember that we should never judge people by how they look, but by what they do." Bobby, who was usually pretty quiet, looked up at me with wide eyes. "Did you really save kids from a fire, Mr. Mike?" "I did my job," I told him, "just like I do every day driving this bus." "That's so cool," he said, grinning. "Wait until I tell everyone at school." Stop after stop, it was the same thing. Parents who had signed that petition, parents who hadn't, parents who'd supported me from the beginning. They all wanted to talk, to apologize, to thank me, to shake my hand. At the last stop, Sarah Martinez was waiting with her mom like usual, but today she was holding something. "Mr. Mike," she said, climbing onto the bus, "I made you something." It was a drawing, done in crayon, with all the care a 7-year-old could muster. It showed a stick figure in an army uniform standing in front of a burning building. Around him were lots of little stick figures, children. At the top, in carefully printed letters, it said, "My hero, Mr. Mike." I had to turn away for a second so she wouldn't see the tears in my eyes. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me," I told her, and I meant it. "Can I keep it forever?" "Of course," she said. "I drew it special for you because you're the bravest person I know." That drawing hangs on my refrigerator now, right next to the citation for my Bronze Star. Both represent the same thing, really. The idea that sometimes the most important thing you can do is show up when people need you, even when it costs you something. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The story had gone national by then. CNN picked it up, then Fox News, then all the major networks. School bus driver hero was trending on Twitter. I got interview requests from morning shows, magazine writers, documentary filmmakers. I turned most of them down. This wasn't about fame for me. It never had been. But I did do a few local interviews because I wanted people to understand something important. There are heroes everywhere, doing ordinary jobs, living quiet lives. The guy who stocks shelves at your grocery store might have served 3 tours in Iraq. The woman who cuts your hair might be a veteran who served in the Navy for 20 years. The maintenance worker at your kid's school might have a Purple Heart in his dresser drawer. We're all around you, and most of the time we don't talk about it. We just do our jobs, raise our families, try to contribute to our communities. We don't need parades or special treatment. We just need the same thing everyone needs: to be judged by our character, not by our appearance or assumptions about who we might be. The real change happened in smaller ways. Mrs. Henderson started volunteering with a local veterans organization, helping recently returned soldiers find employment. The school district partnered with the VA to provide mental health resources for military families. Several other parents who had signed the petition found their own ways to make amends. One started a scholarship fund for children of deployed military parents. Another organized care packages for troops overseas. But the change that meant the most to me was in the kids. They started asking questions about military service, about what it means to serve your country. Some of them started researching their own family members who had served. Bobby Patterson did a school report on his great-grandfather, who fought in World War II. Lucy Chen interviewed her uncle who'd served in the Marines. These kids were learning that service takes many forms, and that heroes don't always look like what you see in the movies. Sometimes they look like the guy who drives your school bus. 6 months later, I got a letter from Afghanistan. It was from one of the boys I'd pulled out of that burning school, one of the twins from my last trip into the building. He was 18 now, and he'd just been accepted to university to study engineering. He wanted to help rebuild his country. "I remember the American soldier who saved my life," he wrote in careful English. "I have thought about you every day since then. I want you to know that because of what you did, I am alive to have dreams for my future. I will use my life to help other children, like you helped me." That letter sits on my kitchen table now, next to Sarah's drawing. Reminders of why we do what we do, why we serve, why we keep showing up even when it's hard. The funny thing is, nothing really changed about my job. I still get up at 5:30 every morning, still do my pre-trip inspection, still drive the same route picking up the same kids. But somehow, everything feels different. The parents wave when they see me now. The kids are more talkative, asking about my time in the Army, wanting to hear stories about different places I've been. Mrs. Henderson and I even became friends, in a way. She brings me coffee sometimes when I'm waiting at the school in the morning. We talk about her boys, about my transition to civilian life, about how easy it is to make assumptions about people when you don't know their story. "I learned something important from all this," she told me one morning. "I learned that the things that make us different aren't the things we should be afraid of. They're the things we should be curious about." It's been 2 years now since all that happened. 2 years since a group of concerned parents tried to get me fired for having the wrong face. 2 years since a community learned that heroes don't always look like what they expect. And let me tell you about life after that school board meeting, because that's when the real magic happened. These kids, they became like my own family. Bobby Patterson started bringing me drawings of soldiers and tanks every Friday. Turns out he wants to join the Army when he grows up, just like Mr. Mike. Lucy Chen learned I was trying to improve my Spanish, so she started teaching me new words every morning, giggling when I messed up the pronunciation. Sarah Martinez, that sweet 7-year-old who called my scars cool, she made it her personal mission to collect interesting facts to share with me on the bus. "Mr. Mike, did you know elephants can't jump?" "Mr. Mike, did you know a group of flamingos is called a flamboyance?" Every day, something new to make me smile. But the moment that really got to me happened about 6 months after the school board meeting. We were on our way to school one morning when I saw a new kid standing at one of our stops. Looked to be about 8 years old, but he was hanging back behind his mom, clearly nervous about his first day. When he got on the bus, I could see why he was scared. The left side of his face was covered in burned scars from what looked like a house fire. Some of the other kids stared for a second, the way kids do when they see something different. That's when Sarah Martinez stood up in her seat and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Those are awesome scars. You look just like Mr. Mike. That means you're brave." Within minutes, all the kids were welcoming this boy, asking his name, making sure he felt included. Bobby Patterson even moved over so the new kid could sit next to him. "Scars are cool," Bobby announced. "They mean you survived something tough." I had to pull over for a minute because my eyes were too blurry to drive safely. That boy's name was Tyler, and by the end of his first week, he was laughing and joking with the other kids like he'd been riding bus 47 his whole life. His mom told me later that it was the first time since his accident that he'd felt confident about his appearance. "Those children taught my son that being different doesn't mean being less than," she said. "They learned that from watching how they treated you." Last month, I got some news that changed everything all over again. Jenny and I are going to have a baby, after all these years of trying, after the doctor said my injuries might have affected my ability to have children. We're finally going to be parents. The kids were more excited about it than we were, I think. Sarah Martinez announced she was going to teach the baby Spanish words. Bobby Patterson started making drawings of baby toys and trucks. Lucy Chen asked if she could babysit when the baby got older. Mrs. Henderson, yes, the same Mrs. Henderson who tried to get me fired, she threw us a surprise baby shower right there in the school parking lot. Turns out she'd been secretly coordinating with all the other parents, and they'd gotten together to buy us a crib, a car seat, and enough baby clothes to last until the kid's ready for college. "I owe you more than an apology," she told me, as I stood there looking at all those gifts. "I owe you a debt I can never repay. You taught our whole community what it means to look beyond the surface. You taught our children that heroes come in all shapes and sizes." I think about that kid a lot. What kind of world they're going to grow up in. What kind of lessons I want to teach them. I want them to know their daddy's story. Not just the part about the scars, but the part about what happened after. About a community that made a mistake, but found the courage to make it right. About children who see with clearer eyes than adults sometimes do. Most of all, I want them to know that everyone has a story worth hearing. Everyone has something that made them who they are. And if we take the time to listen, really listen, we might just discover that the person we thought was different from us is actually more like us than we ever imagined. Every morning when I climb into bus 47, I'm greeted by a chorus of, "Good morning, Mr. Mike," from kids who don't see the scars anymore. They just see their friend, the guy who knows all their names, and asks about their homework and makes sure they get to school safely. Tyler, that boy with the burn scars, he sits right behind me now. He's become my unofficial co-pilot, helping me remember which kids have early dismissal and which ones have after-school activities. Last week, he told me he wants to be a bus driver when he grows up, because you get to take care of kids and make sure they're safe. That's when I knew we'd gotten it right. Not just me, but all of us, the kids, the parents, the whole community. We'd learned that the most important thing you can do is show up for people when they need you, even when it costs you something. We'd learned that heroes don't always look like what you expect, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is change your mind when you realize you were wrong. The scars are still there, of course. They always will be. But they don't hurt the way they used to. They're part of my story now, part of who I am. They represent the worst day of my life and the best day of my life, all wrapped up together. They represent pain and healing, sacrifice and redemption, judgment and forgiveness. When I look in the mirror now, I don't see damaged goods. I see a man who answered the call when it came. A man who chose to run toward danger instead of away from it. A man who learned that sometimes the people who matter most are the ones who see past the surface to the person underneath. And every morning when I climb into bus 47, I remember why I'm here. Not because it's the only job I could get, but because it's the job I chose. Because there's honor in making sure kids get to school safely. Because there's purpose in being the steady, reliable presence in their day. Because sometimes the most important service you can provide is just showing up, day after day, and caring about people's safety and well-being. The kids don't see the scars anymore. They just see Mr. Mike, the bus driver who knows all their names and asks about their day and makes sure they get home safe. That's exactly how it should be. That's exactly who I want to be.